Welcome to Above Zero, the podcast where we have vulnerable conversations filled with courageous testimonies of overcoming. So what is zero? Zero is when we come to the place of surrendering to Christ, accepting his forgiveness, and our sins are wiped clean. I am your host, Amber Love. Welcome to the journey where life begins above zero. Join me in welcoming our guest today, Mrs. Khalila Riga. She is a dedicated advocate and a professional in the anti-trafficking sector, offering technical assistance and training across multidisciplinary systems. With years of experience, she brings a comprehensive, unique understanding of human trafficking and a strong commitment to empowering individuals and communities in the fight against exploitation. Khalila is also an accomplished author and speaker, campus pastor, driven by a passion for promoting freedom and healing to those who have experienced human trafficking. She believes that we all share a responsibility to work together to end human trafficking and support those affected. So I think what we're going to go ahead and do is let's just have a conversation. You've shared a little bit about what you've been through in your life, and I think before we get to, being able to see how powerful God was in those things, we need just a little bit of a background. So whatever you're comfortable with sharing, the floor is yours, and this is your time to share your testimony. Thank you.
Sure. So my testimony is a little bit confusing, I think, because it starts in an odd place, because it starts kind of in the middle of my life and then jumps to my adult life. And then we end up going all the way back to the beginning, which is not typically the way anyone's story is really told, right? Usually when we have a story, we start at the beginning, which is in our youth. And mine is kind of in a midway point. I'll start off with saying that, I always suspected that that I had been adopted in my life, but I always thought it was going to be within the family that I knew as being my parents. And and those suspicions started probably when I was in the fifth grade. I remember going to school and having kids ask me like, "Oh, are those your grandparents?" And I remember that feeling a little off-putting as a kid, because I was like, well, why would you think that they're my grandparents, right? Because as a kid, though, you don't really have a full understanding of age, especially when you're dealing with, when we color our hair, right? You can't really tell our ages as it is with women. And so those were the early seeds that were planted in that something may not be fully correct in what my nuclear family looked like. And I'm probably using that word wrong. Probably meant nucleus, but you know what I mean. So
somebody pick the word that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nuclear still makes sense, but in a different way.
Yeah.
So, most people, they remember their childhoods fondly, right? They're usually full of, visits to grandma and grandpa, or, outings with your parents, different like things that are supposed to be normal, healthy childhoods. And for me, that's not the memories that I have. The memories that I have, which don't start until about fourth grade, maybe third. And those are so fragmented now, especially since I'm so far removed from it. But my memory bank is full of what at the time I interpreted as abuse, or as, just, I didn't know that it was wrong, but I also didn't think that it was right. And so, when I reported to my school counselor that there were things going on at home that I just wanted to stop, the language, that I thought I'd used, which I learned recently is not the language I actually used.
Right.
I was trying to describe that he was coming into my room at night, that there was other men that were friends of the family coming into my room and doing things with me that didn't seem normal, right? And so what I know now is that that was part of my trafficking, because there were men, including the person that I thought was my dad, abusing me and uh, just having their way with me, at a
Yeah.
very young age. And so, um,
And
I
we now have a term for that, and that's called familial trafficking. And nobody
correct,
really wants to believe that that's something that happens,
right,
but obviously it has.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. And so, so I reported to my school counselor, and, what I didn't anticipate coming in my mind as a child, right? I figured, well, if I say something, then they're just going to have a talk with them and then everything will be fine and it'll just quit. Because as a kid, that's
Hmm.
kind of what we're, raised to believe. If I say something is happening, somebody's going to step in and then it's going to stop, right? And
Right.
that wasn't the case. And so what ended up happening is Child Protective Services and, Las Vegas Metro PD and all of these people were coming to my school, and I was continuously being pulled out and asked to retell my story over and over and over to all of these people with no explanation as to why I needed to do that, why they needed to know. No one told me what was going to happen next. And so we get to the end of the school day, and I'm thinking, okay, they're picking me up from school just like normal. And my parents showed up, and I wasn't expecting for him to be there because he worked a swing shift. And so he typically worked like a 4 to midnight shift. So he never was there to pick me up from school. But this day he was. And it was the day after my 11th birthday. And
Mm.
they're both there. Child Protective Services is there. And they're explaining that I'm being taken away and I'm being put into the foster care system, which again, nobody really told me that. And I didn't understand what was happening. And so I have this, if you can imagine this scenario playing out, we all know what the school pickup line looks like for elementary schools, right? You've
Right.
got
Hmm.
parents everywhere, kids running everywhere, staff. It's a mess.
Chaos. Yeah.
It's chaos. It's chaos. And so in front of the entirety of the school, everybody is watching this unfold.
Hmm.
Everybody's watching that there are police there, that I am in the middle of it, and that there's all of this chaos happening. And meanwhile, I have my so called parents off to the side screaming and yelling at me in another language, telling me that I was a liar, that I was a disgrace to the family, and how dare I do this. And that was that. And I went off into the state's care. And so 2 weeks later, I was sent back home.
Hmm.
They
Did you
never served
also,
a day in jail. They weren't arrested. Nothing of the sort happened. So I always say that my history didn't begin with trafficking, it was interrupted by trafficking.
wow,
Um, and so
that's a word
that
right there. Hmm.
it is, it is
Hmm.
because, our lives begin, and they're, our lives are interrupted by things.
Yeah.
You know, God has plans for our life, but so does the enemy. And we fail to understand that and to acknowledge that they both have plans for us.
Yeah.
And we can see that through the story of Job. Job was, well, sure he loves you. He's all protected. He's like, let me at him.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so, and what does God do, which is unfathomable to most of us? He takes the gloves off and he says, okay, you can do this, but you can't do that, right? So he sets a restraint on it.
Yeah. Hmm.
But God did that knowing what the end result was going to be. He knew that Job was going to come through all of that and not curse him and still praise him. And he knew, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, which I think we were at an event recently, and everybody was kind of going around and stating what they were thankful for because it was around Thanksgiving. And so it got to me, and I stepped forward, and this is in the ministry that my husband and I serve in. And I said, I'm really glad that when God made us, He factored in our stupidity, because there's some things that we do that I'm sure God and our angels are just in a continuous face palm, right?
Yeah.
But so, we fast forward from that, and I was sent back home. Eventually, he got visitation rights. Eventually, the court decided that she, his wife, was the one capable of doing these supervised visitations.
Mm.
So you can imagine everything just started back up, business as usual.
Yeah.
And I reported again. And it turns out that my memory of that second reporting is not how I remember it, but trauma
Sure.
does
You were
that to your
11.
brain.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the trauma does that. You remember things entirely different than what they
Mhm.
actually happened. In my memory, I told a really good friend because I knew her dad was a cop and I knew that her dad was going to call somebody in. And I don't care what that paperwork says. I still believe that they're the ones that made the call. And then I got pulled into the camp counselor's office at the YMCA to have a conversation about what was happening. And wouldn't you know, the same thing happened again, only this time in front of the entirety of the YMCA, in front of all of the camps that were there for kids.
Wow.
And this
How
is
did how
unfolding
did that
again.
affect your social connections at school?
So my social connections at school were already poor.
Mhm.
I was picked on, I was bullied. I was not dark enough for the black crowd, and I was too light for the Spanish crowd. And it was the early 80s. So, while we want to believe that
Mm.
there
Mhm.
weren't
I
pockets
remember.
of things happening right within the context of race, there definitely was. And so I didn't get on well with everybody. And so where there was a slight positive impact from the second time uh, that I reported is that, or I'm sorry, the first time that I reported is that some of the kids that normally picked on me rallied around me,
Mm.
and then they defended me and wouldn't let anybody say anything. So that was the first time that I
Wow.
experienced a little bit of protection. Now, in hindsight, there was still they were still bullying me on one end, but on the other end they were also protective. So it was a very weird thing. But what I had as impact was that what I understood then is that no one's actually listening.
Mm.
No one really cares what's happening. This is just going to be the band-aid. Now be quiet and go on about your life.
Yeah.
And that was the messaging that I continued to hear, even in the foster care system. When you move from placement to placement, the message that you hear from your workers when you're being moved around is, you're too much. You're too angry. You're not a good fit for this family. You're not the right age. You're not the this. This is your last chance, right?
Wow.
When you hear those messages, that's where we start to fall into that commodification between foster care and trafficking. Because in trafficking, it's the same message. I want one this height, this age, this race, this personality, this look,
Mhm.
right? And that's the same thing that we heard in foster care, right? When my husband and I did the foster to adopt classes, because we considered fostering, and somebody in the class asked the question, can we pick the kid we get? And the response was yes, you can pick their age, you can pick this, you can pick how much problems they have. And if it doesn't work out, you can send them back and we'll get you another one.
Mm. Girl, I gotta just take a moment on that because I
Yeah,
remember, so I was also adopted but I was adopted at 3. And I remember, and this is not to dishonor my parents. They were, I think it came from good
sure.
intentions, but I interpreted it very differently, like you're saying, like your perspective of it. So we
Yeah,
were standing in the hallway and I was having a hard time calling them mom and dad still. It was like a year later or more.
sure.
And they said, if you don't call us mom and dad, we're going to send you back to the orphanage. And I
Wow.
like it really kind of confirmed a belief system that I'd already started believing, which is if I don't do what they want of me, then I
Right,
will be discarded. And so that
right.
started a pattern in my life of
Yeah,
become who people need you to be to obtain their love because
right.
you're not enough
Exactly.
as you are.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, as a kid, when I started to have these questions of whether or not they were my parents, I began to ask questions. And I remember going to her one day and I said, "Am I adopted?" And she just looked at me. And it took her a moment to answer. And her response was, "Well, why do you want to know?" And I was like, "Well, that's a weird response. If I'm not
Mhm.
adopted, like, why would you say that?" But, I didn't press the issue. And I was like, just because I want to know.
Mhm.
And so I asked again, and I don't remember the time lapse between the three times that I asked, but the second time I asked, um, the response again was, "Well, why do you want to know?" And I said, "Well, there's no pictures of me before, the age of 4.
Mhm.
Where is there proof of me?" Like,
Yeah.
because
Where's
I
my
had
baby
started to.
photos?
Right. Well, because I had started to dig around and find things that I wasn't supposed to find. And I had found paperwork where there were some dates that didn't align with my birthday. And I
Okay.
found pictures where if she was in fact my mother, she should have been very pregnant with me and they were vacationing in Hawaii. So it was like, something's not right here. And so from that, then it was, "Well, go ask your dad." I said, "Okay." So I went and asked him, and he just looked at me and he said, "Well, what did she say?" I was like, "All right, so neither one of you are going to answer me on this." And when I asked the third time and this time I confronted them with the pictures because this time I had them. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Show me you're not pregnant here. Like, help this make sense to me. There's no pictures of me before the age of 4." And so what she didn't remember is that in my younger years, she used to tell me about her family because none of them were alive. I only knew his side of the family, which
Mm.
we were overseas a lot. Um, which as an adult now, it's like, how did you guys pull that off, right? Which I'll get to. But so her response to me was, "Oh, well, I put you with my sister when you were born." I mean, that's plausible,
Mhm.
except for that she forgot that she told me that her sister died in a car wreck in Guadalajara, Mexico before I was born.
Oh.
She forgot about that. So
Mhm.
at that
But that's why
moment,
lying is so hard. I mean, you
it
got to
is. And at
keep
that
up with
moment, I
yourself.
had a very clear understanding I was never going to get any facts out of them. And I left it alone. Because my suspicion again was, okay, you might be adopted, but it's probably still within the family because I'd seen pictures and had met cousins that we looked
Like,
similar, right? I didn't look like the parents, but I looked like my cousin. So I was like, oh, but again, as a kid, you don't know anything about genetics and you don't know anything about anything. So, it makes no sense. So as an adult, I continued in what I would later come to understand was still being trafficked and sexually exploited, but again, missing that language for all of that, and because trafficking wasn't a buzzword, nobody
right.
talked about it, right? Like, it wasn't a known thing, and even if it was, it didn't happen here.
I
It happened
remember
there.
figuring out about like waking up. It was 2008, 2009, something like that. And waking up in my sleep, knowing that I had to look up sex trafficking and I had never heard the term before ever.
Yeah.
So I'm like Googling and I found an organization doing some work in the area. And in that process of supporting that organization, spoke with a sheriff who said, "You do know you're who we're trying to help, right?" And I was like, "What? No, no,
It's a
no."
wild thing when that happens. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, many survivors of trafficking are typically unaware that they
Mm.
have been trafficked until someone has that kind of conversation of,
Yeah.
"You do realize this is you, right?"
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, or, there's a number of ways that happens, but that happens a lot for survivors. And so, so fast forward all the way up until marrying my husband. About a year or so into our marriage, I started to look up obituaries because I had stopped talking to my parents probably 3 or so years prior. Um, and primarily because there were some things that had happened that just raised a lot of red flags for me. And I was like, nope, we have to cut this because I no longer, I feel like you might cause my kid harm.
Yeah.
And so I went off the grid, but I would check up periodically just to see, if they were still alive and well, and, what have you. And so I was looking for information on either of them and found an obituary.
Mm.
And I was devastated. I was devastated. Um, he had died from brain cancer like 9 months or a year before. No one
Mm.
had ever even attempted to try to locate me, to make contact, to let me know that he was ill or that he was dying, nothing. And
Yeah.
so I was devastated. And then it just continued to get worse because in the obituary and in the funeral service, which is available still to listen to online, there's no mention of me. There's no mention of my daughter. It was like we never existed. When they said who he was survived by, I was never.
Um,
So, it was just this, okay, well, why didn't they claim me? And there was a lot of confusion around that. And my,
now, just to be clear, because if I'm confused, maybe listeners are.
sure,
This is the man who was also trafficking you,
correct, but they were my parents.
but they were yes, they were your parents. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I
And
was
you
devastated.
had canceled, or you'd stopped communication a few years prior, so they probably wrote you off as well because
It wasn't the first time I went off the grid.
yeah.
So it wasn't the first time. I'd gone off the grid like that before and not
Yeah.
spoken to them. So it wasn't a first time occurrence.
Mhm.
But I typically always circled back. Like I'm pretty certain that I had at least sent Christmas cards, you know what I
Mhm.
mean, to them. I just didn't
Like, hey, I'm
communicate.
alive.
Right, right, exactly. Here's pictures of kiddo, like here's how she's doing, And so I was devastated. He had died from brain cancer. He wasn't able to speak, nothing prior to
Yeah.
his death. And I found that so heartbreaking. Because in my younger years, he and I had reached a space of forgiveness. Um, he didn't come out and say, I'm sorry in those exact words, but I understood the language that he was using to communicate with me, to communicate that he was remorseful. And I
Mhm.
accepted that. And so for me, I was devastated that I hadn't been able to be present at his bedside in his
Mhm.
last moments, to reconfirm to him that, yes, I have forgiven you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and so I was devastated from that because I didn't understand why I wasn't in this obituary, why my daughter and I were just left out. So once again, this message of being discarded and abandoned and rejected and was all of a sudden reinforced again.
Right.
And so my husband's stepmother, we were randomly having a conversation, and I'd at this point only shared little tidbits of my life because I was forthcoming, but not too forthcoming with people about things. And she said, "Oh, she said, I'm going to buy you that 23andMe thing. Let's find out what your exact nationality is, right? Because again, I've been raised Latina. I speak
Mhm.
Spanish, I read it, I write it, I cook it, I dance it, I eat it,
Mhm. Mhm.
all of the things. I'm
Yeah.
immersed in the community here. Like it's what
Yeah.
it is. And so, and in the Spanish community that I'm connected to here, between the different countries, there was always like this running, like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a joke, but there was like a playful banter of like, oh no, she's Puerto Rican, she belongs to us. And oh no, 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 she's Dominican, she's ours. Right. So like
Mhm.
because we didn't really know, because
Yeah.
by this point I had claimed that I was adopted and that I didn't know what my nationality was.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. Like I still claimed being Latin, but I just, but I had been communicating to people for years that I believed I was adopted.
Mhm.
And so well, we're going to get you the 23andMe thing. I said, okay, no problem. She gets it. I take it. I don't remember how many weeks it takes to get your results back. It's a long
Oh.
time. Oh,
Okay. Is it
it was
okay?
then. It
Okay.
was like probably 2 to 3 months before I got results back.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I get the results back and I was at work and I flipped my wig and just was a hysterical hot mess because the results came back 0.00000% Latin for every country in the book, not Latin at all,
Wow.
nowhere.
You still look Latin. I'm just
Not
saying.
even, not even like a 0.1, nothing,
Nothing.
nothing. And I was like, what do I do with this? So now here we come again, right? I've been discarded. I've been abused. I've gone in the foster care system. The message has been, you're not enough. You're not this. You're not that. You're not this. They die. I get the obituary. I don't belong to them because why didn't they put me in the obituary? And now I have concrete proof, but with nothing to go with it
Yeah.
and nobody to ask questions to, because the people it connected me to were very much, when you think of a classic Irish person, right? What comes to mind is somebody who's a redhead, very fair skinned, blue or green eyes, right? Freckles.
Mm-hmm.
This is all of the people that they paired me with. And I was
Wow.
like, I'm a little brown,
Yeah.
a little dark haired,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so I was confused and, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, uh, I called my husband and he hates when I tell this story, but it's amusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Most people find it amusing now, especially because I'm laughing about it, because it's just men. God love them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They are
Absolutely.
fixers. They are fixers, right? And if we're crying, they're just trying to find the quickest avenue
Just
to
stop
get
it.
us to not, right? And so whether that's humor or something outlandish, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happens in their minds. I would really like to explore that someday. But so I called him, bawling hysterically, freaking out. And I said, "Oh my God," and I'm telling him, it says I'm not Latin. He goes, "Okay, well, what does it say?" And I was like, "It says I'm mostly Irish and Scottish, like 40%."
That's a lot.
Yeah. And then the rest of it was still majority European. There was maybe like 30%, 35 that was African American. And I was like, I don't understand.
That's substantial.
It is, until we get to his response. And he
Okay.
says, well, that's good. Immediate, the well of tears has come to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
Because what do you mean that's
Yeah.
good? What
Yeah.
In what planet do you think that it's good that I have now definitive proof that I am actually adopted? I don't know who my family is, and now I'm not Latin. Well, the government knows those reparations. I was like,
Oh no.
I'm so done with you. I was like, I
He's like,
can't.
we get money.
Right. And I was like, what is wrong with you? But in his mind, you know, this is funny. I'm going to make her stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that. I said, I'm getting off the phone with you. I'm calling somebody else.
Yeah.
Not, not the, that's not what I felt like I needed in that moment. And for him, he was just like, I'm just trying to fix it. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that's an interesting,
Not not
it's an
helpful.
interesting route that you chose for fixing. So, so my stepmother-in-law, we're all like just dumbfounded by the results of this. She's like, I'm gonna get you the ancestry one. Maybe we got the wrong results.
Fair.
Nope. No,
No.
they all came back the same. And so I just sat with it because I don't know how to decipher all of that information that they pair you with. And nobody that they were connecting me to knew anything either, because these were all like second, third, fourth cousins. So nobody close enough in proximity to relationship had ever taken the test to where it would have paired
It
me
would
with.
connect you. Yeah.
Right. And so fast forward a couple of years, it's the week before my husband and I were heading out for our anniversary trip to Gatlinburg.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling a little spicy, I think, this day, because, when you buy things, Facebook will give you the feed for that organization or that business's page. And how the internet is, you've got
Yeah.
like 50,000 comments minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody had commented that they had found like a half sibling or something. And in 3 years, I have never responded to anything on there because I just don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
That's fair.
I probably care a little bit more now, but still not enough to like actually drop a comment or say anything to anybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not that people's lives aren't important. I don't care to jump in the comment train,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
But
it
that
brings its
day,
own, it brings its own extra
It
drama
does.
and issues and if you're like, okay,
Absolutely.
I know who I am now.
Right. But I was feeling spicy that day.
Mhm.
And so I commented on the
You were feeling
entirety of the
Latina.
page. I was definitely feeling that. And so I commented and I was like, oh, that's great. It paired me with a second cousin who's 85, who doesn't know anything, and whose name is Betty. So maybe one day somebody will take this test. And I mean, I just went off on a whole tyrant, and I was
Yeah.
just, yeah, I was a little spicy. But that led to so many comments coming onto mine of, you need to do this, you need to take your data and you need to plug it in here, and here's how you can figure this out. And I was like, I don't care. I'm
Hmm.
going on vacation. I don't care. Like
Hmm.
this, I've waited this long and I've been living with myself for this long. I'll worry about it when I come back from vacation,
Yeah.
right? But there was one woman who commented, and I remember seeing her comment, but I also kind of dismissed it, right? Because her comment was, I really feel like I can help you if you want. And I was like, yep, don't care. Thanks. Like, I think
Hmm.
I might have said thank you, question
Hmm.
mark. I'm not entirely sure that I did. Right. And so 8 hours or so later, I get a message in my inbox on Messenger, and it's from this woman. She says, I promise I'm not super creepy. You can background check me. You can look at, my page. You can do whatever you got to do. She's like, but I went back and I dug through all of the comments to try to find yours because I really feel like I'm supposed to help you.
Oh.
I said, okay. So, well, I know what that is. Even if they don't, I do. I said,
Hmm.
okay, what is there to lose? Right. So she was
What is
armed.
that? What is that?
That's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And so, she may not have known that, but I certainly did. And so I gave her access to both my 23andMe and my Ancestry profiles. And and I gave her my date of birth, which we knew to be December 10th, 1979. And she had my name, which, for the audience to know, my name apparently wasn't Khalila at the time. My name was something else. So the
Was it
name that
even
she
your
was
birthday?
so the name she was armed with was the wrong name, but
Right.
neither one of us knew that.
Yeah.
So she's armed with the name Melissa, and we'll leave the other portions of the
Mhm.
name out, but she was armed with that, a date of birth, and whatever Ancestry or 23andMe had to say. That's all the information she had. She's digging and she's digging. 2 weeks in, she calls me, or no, did she call? No, she messaged me, and I mean, blew my phone up, messaged me, and I was like trying to read my Bible, and I was like, if I look at this phone, I'm not coming back to the word today. Like,
Right.
because I know me, right? Like,
Yeah.
once I get
Mhm.
distracted, forget it. All of the
It's
squirrels
over.
are in the house and I can't get them out, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just where we're at. And
Hmm.
so I was like, no, I'm going to read my word. Well, then the doctor's office calls. Well, I have to answer that phone because they never answer the phone when you actually need to talk to them. So I
Right.
was like,
Yeah.
well, here we go. Here goes the day. Right. So I take that call and I look at the messages, and she's, OMG, I effing found you. And I was like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
What
And
was that?
she's like, isn't your middle name something Hawaiian sounding? Because people see the name Kalila, right? And
Hmm.
to them, it sounds Hawaiianish, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it's Kalila. Mind you, the spelling was also different at the time. And I said, yeah, it's this. She goes, I found you. She said, your name isn't actually your name and you were illegally adopted.
Whoa.
Right.
Whoa.
Right. And I was like, I need you to put that in other terms that my brain can comprehend because I don't
Hmm.
understand what you're saying. Right. And yet at the same time, there was this weird sense of you know what, it's not a weird sense, there was just a sense of confirmation and peace, but confirmation in the, you weren't crazy, you knew something was wrong, and this is confirmation that you're not nuts, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So she keeps digging, and within 2 weeks of that, I get another message from her, only this time it's at night, and I'm driving to pick up my kiddo from work, and I'm like, well, I can't read this because it's nighttime and I'm driving. We
Safety
can all
first.
pretend that we don't read our texts when we drive, but we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. This is
100%.
before they appeared on the screen or do whatever they do if you have that kind of car, right?
Right.
So I was waiting until I got to my daughter's job and I pulled in and I'm like trying to read the message and then she calls. And I was like, hey, I was just in the middle of reading your message. She cuts me off. She's like, you have to call them. You have to get off the phone with me. And I was like, babe, you called me. What do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I have to get off. You called me. I didn't call you, so you can't tell me I have to get off the phone, right? And but she was just so excited and freaking out, right? And
Yeah.
she was like, "You have to call them." And I said, "Call who?" She said, "Your family." She said, "You've been missing for 37 years. They've been looking for you. You've been gone since you were 3."
Wow. How did that feel in that moment?
I was a hot mess of tears and a lot of confusion. Um, because it was just surreal to me, right? Because these are stories that this is what you watch on Dateline,
Right.
right? This is
It doesn't happen to
this is what
me.
you
It doesn't
read
happen.
in a book, right? This is not somebody you know, let alone your own self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's surreal and it's just, is this reality, right? And so she connected me to my dad's sisters. Um, and I was on the phone probably until 4 in the morning. So probably a solid, oh gosh, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, with my aunt, with one of the aunts, right? The
Mm-hmm.
next night it was the next one, and it just kept going in this trajectory. But it was wild because everybody knew about me but me.
Yeah. Oh. Mm-hmm.
I was the only one, right? So they'd spent 37 years looking for Khalila Marissa Bass, who ceased to exist at 3 years old in 1982.
Wow.
That person ceased to exist. And so it was wild. And then I learned I had siblings and that I was a
So
middle
many.
child. And I was like, all right,
Yeah. It's a
you
lot
know,
to take
and
in.
it was a lot to take in. And what's even more surreal is to get pictures and to see people that look like you. Not like look like you because you guys are the same skin color
Yeah.
or because you
Like
guys have some
shape.
similarities, but no, I really actually am the spitting image of some of these people. And
Mm-hmm.
it was wild. Unfortunately, my dad had my biological dad, who is the only person I call dad.
Mm-hmm.
He passed away in 2010. So I never got the opportunity to meet him.
Yeah.
So this was all in 2020 that all of this happened. So this is still pretty recent,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
learning all of this.
Four
Right. So
years
right
ago.
smack in the
Five.
middle of a pandemic, I learned that I've been missing. My name isn't my name, and that
Mm-hmm.
I have humans who've been looking for me for 37 years.
And they have wanted you.
That part. They
Mhm.
wanted me.
Yeah.
And, so it was wild. And eventually we did, I think within a couple of weeks of that, we also found my mom. Um, and so I always am careful. I try to be very careful when talking about my mother. Um, so we got connected, and the first thing she said to me was, "Did you have a good life? That's all I ever wanted for you." And
Mm.
it broke my heart to have to tell her, "No,
No.
mom, I'm sorry. It was awful." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I still didn't share the fullness of everything that I had
Mm-hmm.
experienced because, again, I was still missing language because at this point in 2020, I still had a very loose understanding of trafficking and I still didn't, you know what I mean? Like it just didn't click with me.
And it
And
was very
so,
much still no education on the fact that familial trafficking, you don't have to be transported. You don't even have to leave your home. Like,
right,
because
exactly, exactly. Well, and then there was other forms of trafficking that I experienced as an adult. But again,
yeah,
I didn't have language for that because a lot of times within that grooming process or how a lot of people end up trafficked, right? There's this belief that you develop that you chose it.
yeah,
and that you were in control and you could have left at any time, because that's what society imprints on you, right? Is if you're doing this, well, you chose it because you could have just left.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you signed on the dotted line, you went willingly, so clearly you wanted to. And
Yeah.
that is the current thought process for a lot of,
You gave consent.
you gave consent, right? And so we either have that end of the spectrum, or we have the, well, you weren't kidnapped in a white van, so it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and
Yeah.
well, you didn't have a pimp, so you weren't, like, that's not how that works, right? But so, so she and I got connected several times, that we spent time together, exciting times. Like, I was so excited for the first time that she came to stay with me for the weekend at my home with my husband and I. And I was excited because I get to co-sleep with my mom. Right. Like, and for most adults, they'd be like, I don't want to sleep in the same bed with my parents. But for me, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
So no, I'm fully welcoming that with all of the open arms. Right. But I went and saw my mom for my birthday in December of 2020. And things got weird a few days in. And to this day, I have no idea what exactly happened. She had taken me to go and get inked for my birthday because she and I are both covered in ink, which is absolutely hilarious because I wasn't raised around anybody with tattoos, and yet she and I are equally covered, right? And
I actually went and got tattoos with my birth mother when I met her. Like, she has
right.
a
No,
tattoo
we
on
did
her
the same
leg, and
thing.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
No, we did the same thing. We have matching tattoos. We have two of them. And like, that was just our thing. Right. But so, at this point in December of 2020, we're only 4 months in to me learning about anything. Right. And so she dropped me off at the tattoo shop, and she had told me that she was going to go work on a new salon space that she was doing in where she lives, and that her new boyfriend was going to be with her doing this, right? And so, okay, I, I get it. You have a new boyfriend, right? Like, it's whatever. You are going through divorce, you're almost done with it, right? Like, I get it. But also, in the back of my mind, my coming to see you was not about me coming to see you and your boyfriend. I came here to spend time with you. Right. And so, but it's whatever, he was nice enough. And so, but she comes back to the tattoo shop and we weren't done yet. Right. And she had prepaid for this stuff. And so, with as inked as she is, she couldn't have been unaware of the process. Right. You dropped me off. We didn't have an idea in mind of what I was getting tattooed. There was no pre-drawn stencil. We hadn't had an actual consultation. So we had to do all of that still before they actually started doing the ink. Right. And so, of course, we didn't start immediately. Right. And so, but for whatever reason, she got very angry in that space. And so much so that it was, well, I'm not making him wait on you. And I didn't say anything. I was having my back tattooed, so thankfully I could have my face down, so that my face wasn't able to be seen, because I am like welling up with hot tears because I just don't understand what's happening, right? And I'm just feeling,
And you're getting needles put in your back. Like,
yeah,
how do you manage it?
right. And so, then, and it just continued to be this very uncomfortable space of, well, how much longer are you going to be? And thankfully the tattoo artist stepped in and he was like, we're going to be this much longer. And, she was still very upset, but didn't communicate why. I had no idea why. Like, there was no, well, I had this planned, or, I was hoping for none of that. None of that communication had happened. And so, I tried to pipe in and ask her, like, how is it looking? What do you think? Silence. Tried again. Silence. So now I'm getting the silent treatment on top of all of this. And so, as she's leaving, she said, well, I'll be back at this time and you better be done. What do you say to that? Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Because at this point, I'm embarrassed. I'm in shock. I'm hurt. I have no idea what's going on. And I'm getting the silent treatment.
Yeah.
Right. So when you've dealt with so much trauma in your life, that just
It's
impacts you
mm-hmm.
like and you don't know what to do with that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so she comes back and he was just wrapping up. There was like a couple more numbers he was doing. Right. And again, she's still angry. She's still very much in this. And like you can feel it. Right. Like I couldn't see her at that point, but I could feel the level
Anger.
of tension and anger.
Yeah.
And and she's, do you really have to do all that? And he was like, yeah, this is the style that we picked for these numbers. So yes, this
Yeah.
is what we're doing. Well, how much longer this is going to be? And thankfully, I'm so glad that he jumped in and like saved me from talking because I couldn't talk, right? Like I was
Yeah.
trying to hold back tears and not show anything,
Emotion. Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and still try to exude kindness in whatever way that I could muster, right? Because I'm trying to diffuse the situation and de-escalate things. And I have no idea what I'm de-escalating because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why she's angry,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so he chimes in, he's like, it's going to be about 2 minutes per each one. So this is how long it's going to take. And I was like, oh my God, this is uncomfortable, you
Yeah.
know? And again, and I tried engaging her again and I'm like, how does it look like? And still, when she finally responded, well, I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see. And I was like, really?
Okay.
You're standing right next to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so nothing. And so we finally get done and it's an hour drive back to the house. Silence. Try talking to her or the boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. So, okay. Get to the house. She says, I'm going to bed. Right. I think she gave me half a hug and like went to bed.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in the kitchen and I'm eating, you know, my leftovers from earlier in the day because that's all there was.
Mm-hmm.
And I see tucked back in the corner of the counter one of those like personal cakes, like a small one like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's red velvet and it says happy birthday on it and there's a card. So
Mm-hmm.
immediately what I begin to understand is, okay, you clearly had some other plans that you wanted to do for my birthday that either you wanted to surprise me with or something. And
Mm-hmm.
those plans went to crap because the tattoo shop took longer than what we had
Then you plan.
anticipated.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And so because she wasn't speaking to me, I wrote her a note because that's all I know to do when people are angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is I'll write you a note and when you're ready to receive or respond, then we can talk about it, right? Um, and so I wrote a note thanking them both for the birthday, for doing all of the stuff that they had done, you know, and I apologized if I had ruined any plans and I did
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And the next morning, it's an hour drive to the airport. Again, nothing, silence. And I'm still
Mm-hmm.
trying to engage and nothing. And so I'm sitting in the back seat and I'm like wiping hot tears out of my eyes because I just don't know what to do. And I was
Mm-hmm.
so ready to come home. And I never thought that I would feel so ready to get away from her. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just so hurt and I didn't understand and I couldn't fix it and I didn't know what else to do. And I just wanted to get out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's when you're in that
absolutely.
bad situation and you just want to escape,
And
right?
you're
Like
also
you need to make it stop.
realizing there's some also understanding that I don't know this person.
You know, I didn't have that part at all.
No.
No, I really didn't. We the it was interesting how quickly that bond sealed
Mm-hmm.
from go. I mean, yeah, no, there wasn't. And my husband did try to communicate that. He's like, you really don't know her. And for me, though, right? And I think this is probably natural to, I would think, most kids, right? Like, I don't need to know her. She's my mom.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's my mom. Don't
Mm-hmm.
say that I don't, you know what I mean? And like, you almost
Yeah.
get defensive of like, don't tell me
It's
that I don't know my
also
mom.
because you've been longing for that. You've had these questions your entire life.
Yeah,
Then you find out that you
right.
were illegally adopted. She ever tell you? And then after this, I want to hear about how God has been in your life throughout this.
Yeah.
But did she ever tell you how that happened?
No.
No.
Well, and so that's the thing. So there was stories that she gave me of how I ended up in this family. Um, but I could poke holes in the story early on, but
Yeah.
also I didn't care at that point as much about the story because I don't know what you were dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's whatever, right? Like, I don't care. I have my mom, right? And that was
Yeah.
really, but so when we fast forward so when I get back home from visiting, um, she never responded to me ever again. She untagged herself from every picture and post we had together. She blocked me from her business page. She unfriended me on all social media platforms. She never took a call again. She never returned a voicemail. She never returned a text, not on Messenger, nothing. It went
Mm-hmm.
dead silent. Um, and in the spring of 21, I was having a conversation with a family member who wants to remain anonymous. And they were telling me about a conversation they had had with my dad prior to his passing, because they were asking, what happened to her? Where did she go?
Yeah.
Talking about me.
Mhm.
What happened? Because everybody had been looking. And what my dad communicated to her, he threw the car in park as they were driving down a very busy street late at night on the way to the airport, because he was taking her to the airport to go back home. And he the way that this family member explained it to me, it was like somebody busted open the dam on the floodgates and everything just came pouring out of him.
Mm-hmm.
All the emotion, all the anger, all of the tears, all of the everything came pouring out in one fell swoop. And what he had learned in the community that they were in was that she had left with me, had gone to Vegas, and that I had been sold to some Spanish people. And his last request of my family members, of his sisters, was find her.
Mm.
Just find her. Right? Get her back to the family. Just find her.
Yeah.
And so it was at that point that I began to understand, because at this point that I learned that I was working in aftercare for an organization as a case manager with trafficking victims. What I didn't put
Yeah.
together is when they had interviewed me, they had heard a snippet of my story when I was still learning it, right? I'd only known about anything for like a month. And they had said, well, we need somebody like you here. We need a survivor. And I didn't put that together. They identified me as a survivor of trafficking, and it would be
Right.
another 6 months before I understood what they were saying and what I had actually lived through. And then everything else started to unravel of things that I didn't know were trafficking, things that I didn't
Okay.
know that I had been, part of. I now had language for. And so, but so when we talk about all of that, right? My brother was 7 hours from me. He was in Lake Tahoe and I was in Las Vegas the whole time of my being raised.
Mm-hmm.
He was always there.
Yeah.
There's pictures of my dad in front of the hotels and casinos that I would be at where I would have still been a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And but nobody knew that's where I was. Nobody knew.
Yeah.
And so God could have revealed that at any time, right? But it's just like God to just know when is the right time to let things come out. And it can't all come out at once, right?
Yeah.
Because if he gave us the whole picture, we would turn and run, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he would have told me, I don't know, back in 2010, right? Or 2012, or if he would have told me in 98, or if he would have said something, in 90, this is what's going to happen. This is what you're going to experience, but this is going to be the end result.
Mm-hmm.
No, none of us would do what we're called to do if God would have given us the whole picture of how we're going to get there to do it,
Right.
right? When we look at the story of Joseph, he gave Joseph two visions. Neither one of them involved being thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, the first documented case of trafficking.
Right. And there's multiple in the
There's
Bible.
multiple, right?
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't, he was excited about the visions God gave him. Well, God didn't tell him how he was going to get there.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I remember being told in 2012 when I finally came back to God because I wanted nothing to do with God. I left God back in 1990 and I was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
good. I don't want nothing to do with you. Because if this is what you have for me, I'm good. I'll pass.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want nothing to do with it. And, you know, but I remember being told in 2012, you know, the calling that you have is specific to women and young girls. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, but again, in 2012, I still didn't know that I was trafficked. I didn't know that I was missing. I didn't know any of this, right? And I was
Mm-hmm.
still in communication with my buyers who I thought
Yeah.
were my parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God couldn't have told me in 2012, I wouldn't have been ready to receive that. And I wouldn't have
Yeah.
had the emotional or spiritual maturity to be able to handle all of that. And I didn't have the right supports in place yet to
Mm-hmm.
be able to take all of that on, right? He had to wait until that was in place
Absolutely.
before he could disclose things to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't have handled it the same. I
What's
would
the
have gone
quote?
off the deep.
God is always on time.
He
Like
is.
he knows what
He
he's
is.
doing. And so in 2000, what did you say? 2012 was when you came back to God?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so in
Kicking and
2012 you came back
screaming.
to God. Well, yeah. I've been there. And I think a lot of the people, like the audience that I'm hoping is going to listen and be encouraged by this, is going to also identify with those kind of relationship connections with God. So when you did, give me give us an example of what the sanctification process looked like for you. Like you had obviously you had a lot of healing to do, that you probably had lies that you had to uncover. Like where was there ups? Was it all good? Was it
No.
messy? You know,
Oh, it was all messy. It
yeah.
was it was all messy. I mean, you know, throughout the course of my life, I'd been invited to church half a dozen times or more, right? And I would go on occasion, right? Because church folk, we like to eat, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're the guest, that usually means that you're still going out to lunch with them, but you're the guest, so you're not paying for your own
You're not
lunch.
paying.
And
Yeah.
I am not turning down free food.
Hmm.
So it was very simple for me to, you know, and the people that invited me to church, that ended up proving to be one of the messiest relationships I think I've ever experienced,
Hmm.
which is unfortunate. But um, they had, it was a couple, and he had done my taxes for me, and I'd paid him for it, right? But he had done a deal for me, and we worked together at the time. And excuse me. And so I invited him and his wife over for dinner because, you know, that was my way of saying thank you and, you know,
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and plus I figured, you know, I work with you. I need to probably should meet your wife, like, you know. And so they came over and, you know, she invited me to church, which in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't want
Hmm.
to.
Yeah.
Right? I had
Hmm.
no desire. Like I was perfectly content in my relationship with my then boyfriend. We'd been together for almost 2 years at that point. You know, my daughter was doing good in school. Like life was cool. And I was good. You know, according to me. And so I said yes. And I was like, fine, I'll go. Right. Because also it was like, okay, you did do my taxes for me. So I guess I'll go, you know. And
Went to
and
church out of
so
obligation.
it's yes, yes. And you know, and I'd been to other churches here in the area, right? But there's one church in the area that for as long as I've lived here, it is the one church that everybody comes against.
Hmm.
Everybody hates. Like if you're not saved,
Yeah.
right? Um and like everybody talks about they had a statue of of Jesus out front, or out, it faced the highway, right? And so people would make fun of that and say they were, idolaters and blah, 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 right? Well, lightning struck said structure and
Hmm.
it went up in flames because it wasn't grounded, right? And all of that.
Mhm.
And so, but I can remember when that happened, I laughed and hooped and hollered with everybody else because I was like, that's what they get, right? And
Right.
that was my mentality,
Mhm.
right? Like I was practicing witchcraft. I was like, I'm cool, whatever. I
Mhm.
don't.
I believe in my own power.
Precisely.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that is the church that they attended. And I didn't know that. So that's the church that we were
Went to.
driving to this, and I was like, you have got to be kidding me.
You can't tell me, you
Of
can't tell
all
me
the
that God
churches,
does not have a sense of humor.
oh, he does. He does. Listen, this is why if people say something about my sense of humor, I'm like, you need to take it up with him. He gave it to
Mhm.
me. I don't know what to
Mhm.
tell you. I understand it's a little twisted sometimes, but like, have you met the guy?
Do you know how much trauma I had to go through to be this funny?
Yeah, like it's the whole thing. Like
It's the whole thing.
my whole life is the basis of my humor, which
Mhm.
is highly inappropriate, but here we are.
You
So
know what? Join the group, join the community of people that, if we all got together, like it would be absolutely hilarious. Or maybe it wouldn't because we'd
well,
be like,
no,
wait, we
it
all
would be
get it.
hilarious to us.
Yes.
Everybody
Yes.
else looking in would be like, where's the therapist? Is there a
I
psych ward to hold them
remember,
all? Right.
I
And
remember
so, but
going, I
yeah,
remember going to a women's Bible study, and this was a long time ago before I learned, about trauma dumping.
yeah,
And I'm sitting there and I make some comment that was joking about what I had been through. And I
yeah.
laugh and then I'm looking down at my Bible and I look up and everybody's just staring at me. And I was like, oh, that was traumatic, wasn't it? I'm
The amount of times that I do that. So with my best friend, I now do it on purpose.
yeah.
I know because I know how she responds. Because her
Hmm.
response, because she's like, Khalila, you can't say that, and I'm like, oh no, I can. Safe space, and you signed up for this friendship. I don't know
Yes,
what to tell
yes,
you. Like
100%.
you're getting,
Mhm.
but yeah. So this is the church that they went to, and it's the funniest thing because I think a lot of times in Christianity we have this depiction of what it looks like to get saved, right? And so what we tend to see is, I came to church, the sermon was good, the preacher said this, they did an altar call, I was overwhelmed with emotion, I came down to the altar with my hands raised, they prayed over me, and I've been serving God ever since. The
Hmm.
end.
Hmm.
Not me.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I don't know who preached. I have no idea what the message was about. I couldn't tell you anything about that day. Nothing. The only thing I can tell you is that I asked to come back to the second service. And I
In
remember
the same
saying,
day.
I'm not in the same day. And I
Hmm.
remember saying, I'm not ready to go home yet. Can I
Hmm.
come back for the evening service?
Wow.
And then I never quit going.
Hmm.
So, I don't have this clear defined date or moment that I
Hmm.
can specifically say, this is the moment that I got saved. What I can tell you is that day something shifted.
Hmm.
And I can't tell you what, I can't tell you how, I can't tell you any of it. I have no
Yeah.
idea. I can tell you that let me see, within probably 2 months, I told my boyfriend he had to move out. I had quit cussing, not because I like had thought about it. I just did. Right.
Hmm.
Um, and like, so different things that were just like, no, we're done. We're doing this. We're doing this. But again, there wasn't this clear, like, I'm giving my life to God, right? Like it wasn't, so I don't have that recollection of that.
Hmm.
Um, but I just didn't stop going. And then things got messy really fast, right? Because I still had this longing, right, to be loved and cared for, right?
Hmm.
And I only knew how to go about that in a couple of ways.
Yeah.
And that led to me getting involved with an individual who I invited into my home. So, like, the whole kicking the boyfriend out was like dumb because I just went back to my antics, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like it was the quintessential, starting to backslide, or you make it, you, how do they say it now? You fall into sin. You don't fall into it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you know you have a problem with drinking, don't go to the bar.
Yeah.
If I
Mm-hmm.
know I have a problem with lust or men or sex or whatever, probably don't invite a guy over for the weekend. Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can't really, you know what I mean?
But I think there's something to note that when you have a problem with that thing, the decision to not like you had decided that you were going to do something long before you even had decided who you were going to invite, because our mind is like creating these scenarios to give us what we want. And so I
Right.
learned that in order for me to not do that thing, I had to catch it at its earliest conception,
Sure.
right?
Right. But at this point, I hadn't learned any of that yet. Right.
Mhm.
Like that was all, I
Yeah,
still,
of course it will. Yeah.
I was still so new at Christianity that I just didn't have, but there was men within the church that,
Hmm.
I don't, I'm careful to say that they willingly exploited me,
Hmm.
but also, because I see their lives now and I'm like, well, all right, maybe you try to rationalize it
Maybe
out in
they
your mind.
recognized a weakness and that you wouldn't say no. And so they exploited that for their own personal gain. Is that
Right.
what you're
And
trying
they
to
still
say?
had their own weakness that they were dealing with. And
Which
that,
was that. Yeah.
right. So, so I had that, but I had met this person, um, and I I fell for the line, hook, line, and sinker,
Hmm.
and I just thought they were going to be this great catch, right? They said all the right things,
Hmm.
right? And I remember taking them to church with me, and everybody liked him, you know,
Yeah.
and then he wouldn't leave. So I found myself in this predicament of not being able to kick him out because he wouldn't go, and was still getting all of the love bombing and the guilt tripping. So I'm in this like really nasty cycle again, and I couldn't tell anybody at church because everybody liked him. So what do? You go to church and you tell them, hey, I did this thing that I know that it's wrong and now this is happening, but I also know you guys like him. So I know that my messaging, I know this now from
Hmm.
youth, is no one's listening to you and no one's
Right.
going to believe you.
Hmm.
And that was deeply implanted, right? And I still fight to this day to get some of that out because there's still some of that there. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So that part of the process is still ongoing, right? Because that impacted my relationship with God. Because do I really believe that God is listening to me all the time? There are days that I don't believe He is.
Hmm.
And then I have to ask God to help me with my unbelief and to
Yeah.
help me believe that He's actually listening and that He wants to listen and that He actually cares, not because He has to, but just because He does,
Hmm.
right? And so there's still a lot of that I'm still, working out. And I don't think we talk about that in the church.
Hmm.
I think we do a really poor job of that in the church, if I'm being honest. Um, and so, so going through this process so I found myself in the church still dealing with exploitation, still dealing with a level of grooming and abuse and
Yeah.
not being able to come forward. Right.
Yeah.
And so, so I found myself back in this cycle of, okay, I'm back to sleeping with men. I'm back to, to doing this. So like, I don't know how many people in the audience will have seen The Chosen, right?
Hmm.
I love
Yeah.
the series, but um, there's that one scene that I know everybody was up in arms about, and it's the scene where they show Mary backsliding,
Mm. Hmm.
and everybody, well, that didn't happen in the Bible. Well, first of all, the premise of the show says that they are taking creative liberties and they are filling in gaps to what could have been. They're not saying
Yes.
it did happen. So if
Yeah.
that's your mindset, is that they're saying that this happened, well, then
Hmm.
you're already wrong on your basis, right?
Hmm.
but I found it, but it brought me to tears, because how many of us, Jesus comes, he calls us by name, we're following him, we're doing all of the things, and then life does life, and it rocks us, and we find ourselves, as it says in the scriptures, doing things that we know not to do and not doing the things that we know to do.
Yeah.
And if we look at our Christian walk, for the majority of those who get saved, I would dare say, we all have times that we've backslid or gone back, or, whatever that looks like. So it's not so far-fetched that Mary
Yeah.
might have gone back and
hmm
had a
And
moment of weakness.
and even if she didn't,
Right.
God used
We
that.
do.
God used that to speak to you,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And when we think
Exactly.
about how many times people come to the Lord and then struggle living like a saint and then
Right.
give up because they failed one time,
Right.
like you're
Well,
you're gonna fail, like
and that comes under being legal,
yeah,
being
legalism.
raised in legalism, right?
hmm
Because
hmm
now we're trying to operate like the Pharisees. We're
Yeah.
trying to operate like Saul, of everything being to the 10th letter of the law. And we can't. If we could have, there would have been no need for Jesus.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
wouldn't have been any need for that, but there is. And again, it comes back to God factored in our weaknesses. He factored in our stupidity. He factored in how he made us. He factored in the fact that, Satan has rule over the earth. He's factored all of that in. He's not unaware of, like, he doesn't know it's going to happen. He's not
Yeah.
sitting up there like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. No, he's
hmm
like, all right, you did that. Come talk to me about it, and then let's move on. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, so for me, my sanctification process has been so messy, and I continue to fail in a lot of areas. And, but what I understand now is that all of those experiences serve a purpose. The word says that he will work everything out to the good for those who love him. Right.
hmm
That means that everything I've gone through has purpose. None of us were created without purpose. God didn't create anything without having a purpose for said thing first,
hmm
right? And
Right.
so, in all of the stuff that I was experiencing, and all of the things that I learned about, being missing, and being trafficked, and finding out all of this stuff, is, I had a hard time with it. And I remember having this feeling, and saying to God, God, this is all good and well, but number one, if you don't get glory out of it, this is purposeless.
Yeah.
Number two, I was feeling so, I don't know what the word is, just not weighed down, but but it's almost like the pressure being applied, right? Of all of this stuff, of what you've lived through. And I remember even saying to my husband at one point, in anger and frustration, because I hadn't met anybody else that had lived what I'd lived, right?
Right.
And I
hmm
remember being so upset and saying, you know, it's not that I want to have had the story of addiction, or that I want to have this story, but you guys all have each other. You guys can all identify with, this is what it was like being high. This is what it's. I don't know anybody else who went missing at 3, was sold, was adopted legally,
hmm
right? Because they did go through legal channels, because there was a judge and an attorney complicit in signing off on this adoption, right? So it was done through legal channels. They changed my name legally, right? Like,
hmm
I don't know anybody else who's lived this, then gone through foster care, then trafficked again as an adult, then exploited, then like from 3 to 32.
That's crazy. How
And
are
I
we?
reached a
There's
point where I
still,
was like, this sucks. Like, why? Why am I the only one? And in that moment, God said the thing that has stuck with me since he said it. And I know it's not just for me. So anytime that I'm given a platform to talk, I have to say it, right?
yeah.
And what he said to me was very simple. You are not your past, not even as of 5 minutes ago.
Mm.
You are not your past if that's what you choose. You can choose to still be your past and be identified by it, or
Right.
you can choose the identity that I'm giving you, which is
Which
not your
is,
past, which is a
Mhm.
child of God, which is a son, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is sonship. And, you know, and that really stuck with me, because here I have all of these messages of you are not this, you are not that, you are this, you are this, you are this, you're, and the world will throw all these labels, right? You're a prostitute, you're a hoe, you're a trick, you're a
Mm-hmm.
foster kid, you're not wanted, you're abandoned, you're rejected, you're adopted, all of these things, right? You're too skinny,
Titles.
you're too fat, you're too this, you're too that.
Yeah.
God said, just be a son, just be a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only identity I've given you.
And the thing about being a son or a daughter of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the creator of the universe is it comes with inheritance. It comes
It
with
does.
priceless royalties that we, as we get to know who he is by what
Yeah,
he and who he says we are, we can stand on those things and they strengthen our faith.
they
Uh,
do.
yeah.
And then, you know, but with that, you know, what's often not talked about, I see a lot, and is, you know, unfortunately, the church as a whole, right? Not God's church, because God's church is perfect and blameless and it's spotless,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the church as a whole has done this wonderful job of selling Jesus, um,
Yeah.
in this really fun way of like, you're going to be a Christian and everything is going to be this and da 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 da. Nope. The word says count the cost.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say just count the cost for if you choose to not serve me. You
Yeah.
still had to count the cost for choosing to serve him and to be a Christian, right? If we
Mm-hmm.
look at the disciples,
Yeah.
God, Jesus said, can you drink from the same cup? What did they say? Yes, we can. We all
No, I
say, yes,
can't.
we can. And then, then here comes all these attacks, and you're like,
Then we
wait a
don't.
minute, wait a minute. JK, time out.
And these are just
Where
minor
was this in the contract?
inconveniences. There's no request for us to sweat blood from
No,
us, like to that
no.
level. There is a scripture that I have posted at home that says, you have not sacrificed enough to sweat blood and tears.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, oh, that means there's
I
always
love
other
that.
areas of sacrifice. And then there's another one, which I was trying to look up right now, that says to allow the Holy Spirit to consume everything that allow this fire, which we know is the Holy Spirit, to consume everything that is not like him until it doesn't even seem like a sacrifice anymore. I
Yeah.
remember hearing that and being like, ooh, so it's gonna hurt. So
It's
if
going to
you know,
hurt. It's going
it's
to
gonna
hurt. And
hurt.
that's what I tell people now. You
Mm-hmm.
Life is hard. You
Yeah.
get to pick your hard, right? I
Mm-hmm.
tell people, and the people that I get to work with that are in recovery, that are in homelessness, that are experiencing trafficking, that are trying to come out of it, you get to pick your hard. It's all going to suck.
Yeah.
I don't care if you do it with Jesus or without.
You can
You're
study, it
not
can,
getting out of life unscathed. You're
yeah,
just not, right? But only with God do you get the promise of you're not going to do it alone.
yeah.
Only
And
with God
forever.
do you get the right. Only with God
Mhm.
do you get the promise of when you close your eyes to this earth and transition to my kingdom,
Mhm.
you get a new body. You get no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering, right? So when we look at that, no more tears, pain, and suffering, oh, that means that we're going to get that here on earth. But we
Yeah,
have
no.
to count the cost, right?
Yeah.
And it's not going to be
Mhm.
pretty and it's not going to be easy. And it wasn't easy for the disciples. And those were our forefathers. How dare us to think that life as a Christian means we get to sit on four pews and do nothing and just live hunky dory and get fat off the land. And
Mhm.
well, I'm going to worry about me
So
until Jesus comes.
the phrase count the cost, I'm thinking of it in two ways, and hopefully my
Yeah.
ADHD will allow me to go down both of them. But the
All
one
right.
is that God the Son and God the Father and God the Holy Spirit counted the cost of the death of himself to come down, to be
Yeah.
humble, to be helpless, to be dependent on humanity,
Right.
live a holy life, a perfect life, so that he could die as a sinner, so that we
Right.
could live as though we are not. Knowing that some of us are still going to be like, yeah, but you
Knowing
didn't
that most of
me.
us,
Yeah, most of
most
us are
of
going to be
us.
like, but you didn't mean me. And I'm just so bad that your blood shed over me is not doing what it says it's doing. And then the other, counting the cost, and I may have forgotten it, comes into when we count the cost of saying, am I willing to deny these things that have created death in my life,
Yeah.
you know, to serve God, which also comes with its own attacks from people and and from the enemy and just from
Yeah.
the spiritual forces in heavenly
Right.
places.
Right.
Um, and so there's costs, but when I look at the life that I lived before Christ, my BC,
Yep. Yep.
I had already signed my death certificate.
Yeah.
Now he's given me new life. He has given me new life here on earth, right?
Right.
He brought my dry bones to life. He promises to do those things. And I just want to go to another one. And I'm just going to go with this, hoping that this is what somebody needs to hear.
Yeah.
In Revelations, it talks about he's talking to the churches and they all have different things. And he's like, hey, you have this good thing going on for you, but I have this one thing against you, or I have several things
Yeah.
against you. But for those who are victorious, and then in every church, it's
For
talking
those who endure.
for those who endure, for those who are victorious, for those who sacrifice, I have this. And there was
Yeah.
one that it was talking about promiscuity, the spirit of Jezebel, all this kind of stuff in the church. And he said, for those who are victorious against her, I have a new name written on a white shiny stone, known only to the one who receives it. Like the
Yeah.
creator of the universe, when I am victorious in this battle against sexual sin, against, and I am now, but I'm going to continue it against sexual sin and lust and denying myself. Like I have to really be intentional about not watching certain things because it's
Oh,
everywhere,
absolutely. Yeah.
right? He
Yeah.
has a new name for me, and
Yeah.
it's his name that he's given me, not the name that my family gave to me at birth,
Right.
my birth family or my adopted family. It's a name from the creator. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I really want to encourage somebody. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your story and what you have gone through. And you can just see the love of God all over you. And I want to make sure that we leave a little space for you to just tell us what you're doing, what
Yeah.
your ministry is, share those things. But I also want to just encourage anyone who's listening who is maybe identifying, hey, what is sex trafficking? What, could that be something that I was involved in? That there are lots of places you can go to find that out. One of my favorites is Safe House Project. You can go to www.safehouseproject.org. There's resources there. There are safe people to talk to, as I used to work for them. So I want to say that for those who are listening. And then if you can give a word of encouragement as you close out, for someone who
Yeah.
may be in your shoes. Tell us
Absolutely.
what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a recently published author of the book, The Story of Foster Care, Volume 2. I was not part of Volume 1.
Okay.
Volume 2 is specific to the intersection between human trafficking and foster care. That
Mhm.
book was co-authored with 3 other survivors and 4 allies within the trafficking and foster care sectors. And so that's available on my website, which is KhalilaRiga.com. I also am a Survivor Advisory Council board member for the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking. I'm partnered with another organization here in Ohio called Sidewalk Soldiers, where we, do outreaches and we provide love and the gospel and resources to those that are experiencing trafficking and are wanting a way out, or just need to have a warm place to rest their head for a minute
Yeah.
and get their needs met.
Wow.
My husband and I are evangelists. We currently serve in a ministry called Bridge the Gap, where we conduct dinner churches every week in the literally the worst area of Cincinnati, Ohio. We actually were just looking up some details, and according to the Realtor website within Cincinnati, the top 10, where we are at is the first one.
Wow.
Is the worst of the worst. And so we serve that community every week. We are partnered with Bridge the Gap Ministries. We're the campus pastors for the location in Price Hill, where we offer food, we offer the gospel, we offer access to resources if they're needed.
That's amazing.
There's so much. Yeah. We're the house
here.
evangelist for our church. The Congregation of the Lord is the name of our church, and the Christ Learning Center Ministries is who we are under. And so there's a lot of great information there for discipleship. There's a whole course and then we have some things on the horizon, but they're still in the works. I recently launched merchandise on my website. So all of that proceeds goes towards funding the work in the anti-trafficking sector and making it possible to continue to do trainings and speak to communities, organizations, churches. I do a lot of that nationally. So I travel to provide training on a number of things, whether it's trafficking, foster care, the intersections, trauma-informed care, ethical storytelling. So I do a lot of work. So please come visit the website. Please reach out if you have questions.
And I will tag all those in here.
Yeah. And so, and I'm sure I'm forgetting things, and that's fine.
And that's okay.
As you know, and I know I said this before, don't forget that God really does say to you that you are not your past, not even as of 5 minutes ago. And there's a but God in every part of your story. There just is, right? I should have been dead, but God. I should have been incarcerated, but God. I shouldn't be in my right mind, but God, right? So there is a but God for everybody's story. It's not just me, right?
And even if you were in prison and you're like, I was in prison, there's a but God there for you. There
is absolutely. I was in jail, and there was a but God. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I've experienced it all, and there's hope. There really is. Even when it's at its darkest, that's where hope shines the brightest, if you're willing to let it in. So yeah, that's my encouragement to people, is just, don't dismiss the but God moments in your life. Don't overlook them. They're significant. You're not your past, and God can and will do anything and everything through your situations. You have purpose, right? And he'll take everything you've been through and turn it into purpose.
And don't let your past dictate your future. So I think when you're saying that,
part of it. Yeah, it can be part of it.
Control, meaning there are two paths, right? You can take one that says, I will always be a victim. All these things that happened to me ruined my life, and control where my destiny goes. And it's going to take us there. Or you can say, I'm going to fight against that. I'm going to believe that I was created with purpose, that I had destiny, that before I was knit in my mother's womb, God knew me.
Right. God had plans for us.
And keep pursuing God. That's what I want to say also is, if you're listening, chase God, just him. And your life will be changed. So thank you so much, Khalila.
Yes, absolutely.
So excited that we got to meet and link up. And now I know we are steadfast friends in ministry.
Yes,
so thank you for coming and sharing your story. And I will talk
to you
again. Thank you. Wait, hold on. I'm going to have to edit this.
I know.
Okay. Thank you for coming on to Above Zero and living life above zero with me.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, I'm grabbing my coffee. It's been down there the whole time. I meant to have it in my hand so that I could actually take a drink, and then forgot.
That's okay. I'm going to really have a fun time editing that ending.
That'll be fun. It'll be good.
I'm stopping.